remind people to be respectful to the gay Republican that we're in. Well, my name is Norton. I'm the Vice President of the Tampa Bay chapter of Log Cabin Republicans. 2 disclaimers I'll give you up front. Number 1 is I'm not here to debate politics or to try and sway people over to the Republican Party. And what I am here to do is to give you a little bit of information and with more of a focus on how we can partner together for equality. And then the second disclaimer is it's really tough to offend me. So you can be open, you can be honest, you can be blunt with questions that you have. So on that note, I'll start off with addressing the giant pink elephant in the room. How many, if you had to guess in 2008, what percentage of people who openly identify as gay or lesbian voted for the Republican candidate, John McCain, for president? 0%? 1%? 40? Did somebody say? 40%? That's much closer. It was 27% in 2008. And presidential elections over the last couple decades, with about anywhere from 25 to 30% of gay and lesbian people have voted for the Republican candidate. You probably don't, it doesn't sound right to you for a reason, and that's because a lot of gay and lesbian Republicans and conservatives are not exactly very outspoken about their positions for a lot of reasons, and we'll get into it in a moment here. Log Cabin Republicans, we exist as, why is it not working up there? That's not working for you.
We're not getting a signal.
Oh, okay. There we go. I'm getting something at least on my side. But we exist as a voice for gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and also our straight allies who are conservatives and Republicans. And we have a sort of a mantra of inclusion wins, and we have 2 meanings for that. And one is that ultimately, equality will probably only be achieved with some measure of bipartisan support. We have to reach across the aisle in order to accomplish the mission that we have of equality. And then a second reason for that is that ultimately the Republican Party will fail. It will cease to exist without opening the doors and becoming more inclusive. So we are loyal Republicans, we are conservatives, and our history goes back to, with Log Cabin, the 1970s when we partnered with Ronald Reagan in California. He was the governor of California at the time to defeat the Briggs Initiative. The Briggs Initiative was a piece of legislation that would have discriminated against gay and lesbian teachers. Ronald Reagan opposed that measure during a press conference, and then he backed that up with writing an op-ed piece for the LA Times, in which he criticized it and said that homosexuality is not a contagious disease. We don't have to be worried about gay and lesbian people teaching our children. And that was the beginning, and we were successful in that first venture that we had as an organization. Now we have 50 chapters nationwide and a political action committee. We have a nonpartisan group called the Liberty Education Forum that we partner with. It's basically like an HRC. We're also partners with HRC, Human Rights Campaign, but Liberty Education Forum is an organization that reaches out to the people who are most likely to oppose equality. So social conservatives and people from the far right religious spectrum. We reach out to provide education, information. In social science research, the primary way that we can help people to overcome stereotypes and biases is to continuously expose them to people from that minority group on a peer level. In other words, it's about relationships. And since my next slide is not up there, I'll just kind of off the top of my head, our values as an organization, we believe in individual rights, individual responsibility. We believe in conservative fiscal responsibility and accountability to the public, preservation of the U.S. Constitution, that includes minimizing the role of federal government in our lives and increasing the role of individuals to have freedom for themselves. So those are basically our primary principles as a party. Now, how do we get the name Log Cabin Republicans? And that goes back to the year 1854. In 1854, the Republican Party was founded. And it was founded in part because the major political parties at the time, the Whigs and the Democrats, and the Free Soilers, none of them could offer something that was a combination of constitutionalism, preservation of the U.S. Constitution, and a platform of equality in the form of abolition of slavery. And so our founding platform included abolition of slavery, and we caught on like wildfire because 6 years later, 1860, we took the White House. The 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, was elected the first Republican president, in part on the campaign of abolition and of equality and freedom. And of course, as many of you know, the Emancipation Proclamation he's responsible for the Emancipation Proclamation. And following the Civil War, the Republicans continued with their tradition of equality in the form of racial equality. Were targeted by the KKK, so that our early politicians were intimidated, beaten, and in some cases actually killed by members of the KKK because we were supporting equality. At that time, a lot of the Democratic concentration was in the South, where there was a lot of resistance to equality and racial freedom. And then we took a leadership role for the women's suffrage movement. We were the first party to officially support women having voting rights, to have equal say and equal voice in the politics of our nation and direction. Some of you may know Susan B. Anthony, Republican. And after the women's suffrage movement, we took a leadership role in the civil rights movement. In the 50s and 60s, Dwight D. Eisenhower was the first president to sign the civil rights piece of legislation. And then when you go to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we actually have a stronger percentage of Republican support in Congress than Democrat support. Here, this is actually an actual voting record for Nikki. Oh, it's not up there. 1964 Civil Rights Act. So we had stronger Republican support. Then something changed. And in the 70s and 80s, which is hard to see, was a lot of people who were fundamentalist Christians really flogging to the Republican Party. And a part of that, I believe, is that the Republican Party has a strong constitutionalist platform. We support the Bill of Rights, including the right to the freedom of expression of religion. And so many of these folks thought the Republican Party would do a better job of preserving their religious freedoms. And I think that religious freedoms are a really important thing to preserve. The problem is that there's a big difference between me having the right to express my religion freely and me imposing my religious beliefs onto the masses, using the government as a vehicle to force or coerce people to behave the way that I want them to behave. To many of us who are conservatives, more libertarian-leaning conservatives, who believe in limited government and increased individual rights, this is a hypocritical stance for the Republican Party and those members of the party who take that position. Because they preach individual rights, limited government, and then they switch sides for this one issue to legislate onto the masses the way that they want people to behave. The only true inalienable rights, many conservatives believe, are those that by their very definition, their very essence, do not infringe upon the rights of others. So that